go meet with an alchemist north of Bremen. So they've gone to see this alchemist north. Greetings, everyone. My name is Scott, and welcome to Optional Rule. I run a weekly live stream chat here on Twitch and on YouTube to discuss all things related to tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, and actual play at the table. I like to differentiate this show a little bit by helping to talk people through all the messy difficulties of running actual games, hosting them either online or in person. And I think the thing missing from the dialogue that you see online is that the people talk about in ideal situations that if you just do one thing or another, that things magically work out. And the truth is, as everybody knows who's ever run a game, things are just messy. And getting comfortable with that messiness of running games or playing in games makes more games out there in the world to be played, and it improves their quality. And that's what this stream is really about. So what I try to do is I talk about elements of Dungeons and Dragons that I think are important to me as a game master. I've been running games for almost 40 years now. And I love it. I love game mastering. I love playing. I love every aspect of role-playing games. I've been doing this longer than I've been doing anything else in my life. So it's a hobby I really love, and I hope you'll love it too and get a lot out of it. So I talk through those messy elements so you'll get comfortable, you'll feel confident enough to go run a game, and you should run a game. If you want to run a game, you should. One of the early things I always say about the time that when all of us were coming up in D&D, I'm an old man, I started a long time ago with Dungeons and Dragons. I always like to say that the reason why we all ran games is that it never occurred to us not to run a game. It never occurred to us that we shouldn't, or that there was a pressure, or any of the tropes out there that people think are part of game mastering that keep you from doing it now because you think I have to do X or I have to do Y. That didn't exist. It didn't occur to us not to run a game. So I think you should do the same thing. Go out there and run games. Go out there and play games. Take a leap. Go meet other people. That's your tribe. Don't shy away from your tribe. It's a great community out there, and I urge you to be a part of it. All right, so thank you again for joining me today. What I'm going to talk about today are the big development in the Dungeons and Dragons community is the release of Tasha's Caldron of anything. Of everything. I can't say that right today. Oh no. Tasha's Caldron of Everything is a good book. I'm not gonna review it today. I'm just gonna talk about the utility of it and how you might be able to incorporate it into your game. Because let's get back to that messy part about gaming and DMing. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. It's part of the lexicon to some extent. It's part of the lexicon of the D&D material out there. I think it's a pretty good book personally, but you're entitled to your thoughts if you don't, and whatever reasons those might be. But regardless of what you think about it, players are going to come to your game thinking about what's in Tashas, asking if they can use it. You're going to have to make some decisions about what you'll let in and what you won't let in. So being aware of it, I think, is hugely important. Tashas is interesting because it really includes a great mix of tools for the game master and tools for the players, and a bleed between the two. Players, DM is just a player at the table, and the player is someone who helps create narrative similarly to the DM as well. So these are all tools that help you do that trade-off back and forth, and being aware of what's in there at a minimum will help you understand what people are asking for, and might give you some tools to adopt in your game that you think are useful. So I want to say thank you to everybody who joined me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you will go ahead and chat in the live stream. At least say hello. I would love to see a hello from you. But if you have any questions, if you have feedback, something that you want to add to the discussion, I'm happy to read that out on air. I usually say your name. So if you don't want your name said, please put that in the chat. But I usually welcome people, ask their question for them live in this chat, and then I try to answer it as best I can, with the caveat that sometimes I just got nothing. Sometimes people ask me questions out of the blue, and the best answer I can give is, geez, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that. So I want to thank you again for joining me, and I'm looking forward to today's stream. And what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk about Tashas, and then I'm going to get into some session prep for Rime of the Frostmaiden. If you were able to join me last week or saw last week's video, that video was entirely on... Was it that video? Yes, I think it was. One of the videos was recently on encounter balance. There's an urgent encounter in the upcoming adventure that needs to be rebalanced. I'm actually going to use Matt Coviel, who you might know from YouTube or from Strongholds and Followers. He's a luminary. Everyone really loves Matt. I love Matt. He's got a video out called Action Oriented Bosses, I think it's called. I'm using that technique to rebalance one of these encounters, and I hope that'll be useful and interesting interesting to you. But we'll get that towards the end. I want to talk about Tashas first and where I think that fits in to the DM and some of the things you need to think about. So if you haven't read Tashas, one of the interesting, it includes, as you can see here, this is the table of contents from D&D Beyond. So, as I say every week, this is not a sponsored stream. I love D&D Beyond. I've bought into them. I find it super, super useful as a tool for me as a DM and as a player. But yeah, so I use this. Oh, one thing I want to say, I want to promote something. I don't normally do this, so I'm doing my very first live stream game tonight as a player on Twitch. Look at the Adventurers Guild on Twitter. I will be in the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. slot, which is rough for me because I'm an old man, but I'm going to tough it out. I'm in that 4-hour slot, but they are streaming 24 hours in as a benefit to Extra Life. I hope you'll consider going in there and donating. I hope you'll tune in tonight between 10 p.m. Eastern Time and 2 a.m. Eastern Time. It'll be much earlier on the West Coast, and if you're in England, it's probably it's almost your morning. But if you're able to join it, I'm going to play a character based on Frenchie from the Boys TV series on Amazon Prime, if you've seen it. So I'm playing an artificer, artillerist, explosive-oriented, ennui-driven, existentialist philosopher. I think it's going to be really great to play that character, and I'm going to enjoy it a lot. So I hope you join us then. So anyway, back to Tasha's and where the utility of this is. So where the first thing, if you read it, you've seen this already, but as you can see, about half of the book, half of the content is oriented towards character classes. Now that really makes and the rest of the half is really some more feats and things like that, but the rest is really strongly DM tools. I love most of these options. The reason why I love them is that it starts to let you branch out with optional rules in Dungeons and Dragons to make your setting a little bit more opinionated. I think one of the things that people don't realize about D&D is its strength is one of its weaknesses. Its strength is its mass appeal, its broad appeal, its simplicity to use, but that's also a weakness because as a general tool, it lacks a point of view. So you're seeing with things like Tasha's tools for the GMs about natural hazards or sidekicks, where it makes it more opinionated about how magic works or how you fit into the world and provides you with more narratively rich options to build your world. I do intend to do a future session about world building because I think there's a lot there about why D&D is a generic setting is misunderstood. It's not that that doesn't mean it's bad. It's D&D has an applied setting and it has a generic way that the rules are built, and that's great. But to go that mile as a DM and really make the world your own, that's an important part of that gaming process. So anyway, back to this. So Tasha's itself, what Tasha's include on the character class front, it's important to understand is the two things that it provides is additional subclasses, which are useful to any DM at any table. And I've mentioned before in Twitter and so forth, I'm worried about subclass bloat, but that's not what I'm worried about here. A lot of these subclasses are pretty good, although I'll talk about one or two of them. The other thing, though, is it talks about feature adds or replacements to vanilla classes from D&D, and this to me is probably the biggest change of any D&D book issued in all of the lexicon of books, because it's literally fundamentally changing the way some classes are working and then adding whole abilities. So it's not always clear. So you really need to be clear as a DM which pieces of this you want to adopt, why, what the impact of the game is, and so forth and so on. I'll just give you a quick example of that. If you look in, let's say, the wizard context, again, these are all optional. Tasha's is everything in here is listed as optional. By the way, just as an aside, there's all these quotes from Tasha, the NPC. They're some of the funniest quotes I've ever seen in any D&D book. I think that alone almost makes it worth it. The art is amazing too, as you can see. But let's go into the classes itself. There are things that say it might replace a class feature, but there are a lot of class features that are just added. So by default, most of the classes that blend with Tasha's rules are already more powerful than any class from the player's handbook, since they give additions to every class. And this is one example. So the wizards, in the case of wizards, they get an ability called cantrip formulas at 3rd level, wizard feature. not a subclass, not a replacement for a different feature. It's just an additional feature. Now, this is that they can scribe, basically on a long rest, they can swap out what cantrips they know and what cantrips they're using. And there's some opinions on this. I actually think it's great. I had a house rule previous to this where cantrips can be cast as first level. It made it almost not worth it because you'd have to scribe it. But so this is actually more powerful than that. But it made no sense previously to people about why the most simple spells, you can only cast one or two of them and can't switch them out. The downside of that is people complain that wizards are already versatile enough. So why give them more versatility? I'm not going to get into that. I don't think it's bad. But that's an example of now there's a whole new ability that all wizards get. It's not a subclass. And that is replicated across many, many classes throughout the entire book. Probably one of the biggest classes you see changes on of these sort of ability changes. I'm clicking on it now. As you can imagine, the Ranger gets a lot of attention in D&D. I think that's overblown. I think that you don't really. I think they're a fine class personally. There's some problems with them, but I think it's overblown how nerfed they are. They're just fine to me. So, but you can see there's a lot of abilities that base Ranger abilities are either added to or they are replaced. So getting into it here, there's Deft Explorer. It's a first level Ranger feature and it replaces the Natural Explorer feature. So when you create a Ranger character, if you're using Tashas, again, it's optional, you can choose to go ahead and say, well, I'm not taking the Natural Explorer feature, I'm taking the Deft Explorer feature, and you get to go in here and choose one of these other abilities instead. Same thing with Favored Foe. There's a Ranger first level replaces the Favored Enemy feature and works with the Foe Slayer feature. So they're able to replace that feature and it works with their Foe Slayer feature a little bit later. Again, it replaces that ability. And then there's some additional. So those replacements are now additional features. That a second level Ranger now has their spell list expanded, which isn't all that of a surprise. They have some additional fighting options. So you can really see it's this mix on the class level of additional features that they didn't have access to before, additional abilities, and then swapping out abilities that people thought, in the case of the Ranger, many people complained that they were poorly balanced or they required too much context, or there was a lot of people's thoughts on the Ranger. This seeks to modify that a little bit. Also, the big thing they get into a couple additional Ranger archetypes, and then they get down to the Beastmaster, which is probably one of the most lamented classes in all of D&D. The Beastmaster itself, people complain, I think rightfully, that there's some difficulties, there's some problems there with balance. It tried to rebalance it with the Primal Companion. Instead of taking a CR creature from the book, you basically take a beast of the land, beast of the sea, or a beast of the sky. It gives you some scaling bonuses. There's some other DM rules later called sidekick rules. You can choose to mix those in with it that are really interesting as well. So there's a lot that can be done here with the Beastmaster now. They have some of the actions are still a bit of a mix. To set the stage for that, one of the core complaints about the Beastmaster, besides the beast not scaling, was that it required a Ranger to sacrifice an entire attack action to get their beast to take an attack action, and that seemed to be a big sacrifice for very little gain. There's a lot more to that, but I think just at a broad level, that's where I'm going to leave it. This does similarly. What it says now is you can issue a bonus action. You can tell your beast to use one of its actions listed. So if a beast of the land, you can use the maul action, or the sea, the binding strike, so forth. Or you can still use one of your attacks from your attack action, not the entire attack action, to ask it to do it. Now, this has caused some confusion. I think some people online have assumed that meant the beast can be issued 2 attack commands. I don't read it that way. The beast is never said to get multiple actions. You can just choose now. It's flexible. You can choose to use a bonus action or one of your attacks from an attack action to issue that order. The reason being is because the Ranger has a lot of bonus actions that they might want to switch their Hunter's Mark, or they might want to cast a spell or do a lot of things, or so they may not want to use their bonus action. They may choose to use an attack instead. So some of it's a little unclear. I think it's worth a good read, but I really think most of these changes are really actually pretty good. I can think of very few instances of reading this book that I thought, I'm not going to include that in my game. I'm going to include almost everything here. I will get to, and if you follow me on Twitter, you would have seen this before from some of my tweets. I hope you will give me a tweet, a follow on Twitter, by the way. I should say all my social medias. I'm here on Twitch. I'm here on YouTube. On Twitter primarily. I'm also on Instagram a little bit. Go ahead and give me a like, thumbs up, follow, all the social media things. I'd really appreciate it if you joined that community. I'm looking to foster discussion with people, and I enjoy engaging people online and on social media. So I hope you'll go ahead and join me there. All right, so back Twitter, I said some things that the only thing that really I thought I didn't understand the role of this for me was on the wizard side. There is the wizard order of the scribes. The blade singer changes, by the way, are really good. That's another thing I should mention before I get into order of the scribes. One of the things that this book does is it aggregates a lot of previous content from other books. The Blade Singer was in Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. Some of these spells were Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. The Artificer class was presented multiple times in different books. The latest being Explorer's Guide to Eberron. No, that was Eberron Rising from the Last War. So they have added to them and changed them. And I do think that makes it difficult for gamers and players, gamers of all kinds, to keep up with the changes. That is the downside of all this. It's sort of, you're trying to now keep a version, although they're not changing the version name, this is kind of version 5.1, 5.2, however you want. Like maybe Explorer's Guide to Eberron was 5.1 and Rising of the Last War was 5.2. This is 5.3. I don't know how you want to tag it, but it creates this fracturing, this sort of slicing of the D&D rule set in a way that makes it difficult to keep track of. That's a plug for D&D Beyond. I mean, at the end of the day, it tries to keep a definitive set of clarified rules here in one location. It is a downside of owning the books. I will say that. I don't have great advice for you as a DM or a player other than be flexible with one another, try to understand where a rule came from, and try to settle at the beginning of a game, especially if a rule is important to you, which rule you're using, which version of a spell you're using. I recommend always staying up to date with the latest, but there's an implication there that you're going to be buying the latest book all the time, which might be part of their sales strategy. But and that might be too expensive for you, and that's okay. That's okay. Go ahead and decide which version of what you want to use, and basically stick to it there. Hi, everybody who's joined the chat. Go ahead and drop a hello, drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I'm in Tasha's Cauldron or everything. I'm about to get into Order of the Scribes, which is the one that I don't think I'm going to include in my game. I'm going to talk about why here in a second. Most everything else I thought was pretty good. I make one comment about something someone asked me on Twitter about what I included, and they thought it was unbalanced, but I don't think. That's over on the rogue side. So I'll get there in a second. So, Order of the Scribe. Why do I not want to include this in my game? There's two real areas. One is I think the rules. When I look at it, I don't feel like the rules are balanced very well. One. And two, and this is a big item of balance you should consider if you're creating your own homebrew. There's two real main gates it has to pass through. One, is it comparatively balanced to other powers of its level? That's, I think, a great question you can ask. You need to do a lot of referencing back and forth. And two, does it intrude on a unique area of another class, another race, or something like that? I think those are two really, really big elements you need to consider when you're creating homebrew content, when you're trying to balance it. So that's what I'm going to critique this on primarily, and why I'm not convinced I'm going to use it. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad class. That's irrelevant. It's just, do I want to use it in my game? So the two areas are the spell book feature. Yeah, so when down here, the Awakened spell book, when a wizard casts a spell with a spell slot, you can temporarily replace its damage type with a type that appears in any other spell in your spell book. So basically, and you can use it a few times per day, blah, blah, blah. But so basically, it lets you modify spells on the fly and their damage type. That, I think, is an underappreciated how powerful that is, especially as you go higher in level, that where you run into monsters with damage resistances, with damage immunities, being able to turn and say, nope, my fireball now does, which is already an overbalanced spell. It can be anything now. It can be an acid burst. It can be a lightning burst. That's immensely powerful in D&D, because resource management is supposed to be one of the core elements of system balance and system design. And wizards are supposed to be about preparation. They're not supposed to be about modification. That, to me, is the domain of the sorcerer, not the wizard. So the sorcerer's shtick, its whole thing, is that it can modify with meta magic things on the fly. It can reduce time. It can change damage types. It can extend spell. It can do all kinds of things. But the domain of the wizard is studying and preparation. And I think this bleeds over too much onto the sorcerer's abilities of changing things on the fly. One, and two, I think it just is it's overpowered. It just, the ability to sort of select a damage type that a monster might be vulnerable to on the fly, I think is a little OP. So that's one of the big reasons that I am not sure I'm going to add that. Additional, on top of that, there's this other ability where a wizard can cast a ritual spell. I think it's once per long rest. They can cast a ritual spell as with the normal action, so they don't have to do the 10 minutes of a ritual spell. They can cast it basically just like an additional spell slot. So they're granting the wizards two abilities, one of which is be able to change damage on the fly, and the other is giving them additional spell slot. You're giving them more spells than all other wizards. You're giving them the ability to change their spell damage type on the fly like a sorcerer. I just don't think this is I don't want to say negative things about the designer, so because that's not what I'm trying to do. It's just not a spell that I think fits with my style of DMing or subclass. So I'm not going to use the Order of the Scribes, and that's for reasons. But I would love to hear what you thought about it if you've read it, if you have a different point of view. And I'll give you an example just in a second of where somebody was able to change my point of view on this. But if you have a different point of view on that, why it's not unbalanced, why you think that's not thematically wrong, or if you don't think it matters. I mean, there's lots of different ways to think. Leave that in the comments. I'd love to read it out here on live on air. But going back to the where my mind was changed, and that was over on the rogue. So again, we're dealing with all of these classes from Tashas, and this is going to be a little hard to balance, where they were added abilities or they were changed out abilities. Now, I originally tweeted I thought the steady aim feature for rogues was unbalanced. That's an additional feature, so it's not replacing anything. They just get this whole new feature, and that's called steady aim. It looks like it was intended for ranged weapons, but by reading it, it's not. My read on it is it's not limited to ranged weapons at all. It can happen anywhere. So as a bonus action, the rogue gives himself advantage on their next attack roll in their current turn. You can use this bonus action only if you haven't moved. So if they haven't moved, they can use a bonus action to basically give themselves advantage on the next attack. And the reason why I originally said I thought that was overpowered is criticals for rogues are absolutely the thing that they're trying to manage, because you can choose to apply your sneak attack damage to any strike that's landed, and you can decide after it's rolled. So they can decide if a strike is critical, and then they can add their sneak attack damage. Now that's incredible burst damage. And rolling, my original premise was during that with a hand attack, they can look to see if they get 2 chances now to critical. They can decide if they want to add their sneak attack damage, and that really ups their power level. Someone pointed out to me though, and I think correctly so, this actually is a great design because there was a gap. This is filling a gap that existing before, and that is the gap of dual wielding rogues. That already with a bonus action, a rogue that is dual wielding, which is pretty common, they get 2 attacks, which is essentially the same number of rolls as an advantage. With a bonus action, they get 2 attacks, 2 chances to crit, apply their sneak attack damage to either one. So it already exists for hand attack weapons. What it did not exist for was ranged attack weapons. So with a rogue with a bow, a scout, a crossbow, anything like that, they didn't have those 2 rolls. There was very few ways to apply 2 rolls per turn where they get the chance to critical. So it really hamstringed. It really nerfed ranged attack rogues. And this is a really elegant way. Now, given that light, someone on Twitter talked to me about this. Seeing it in this light, this is a really elegant way because it forces them to stay in place. They can't take any action. You can see the little art piece here is them taking a knee. And they can go ahead and get an advantage on that roll. I think that that's really fantastic. I think it's a really subtle and great way to add and patch maybe what was a small gap for rogues. So yeah, Twitter changed my mind. I was wrong when I first tried to say that was unbalanced. So that's where we are. So the rest of Tasha's, I'm not going to go into each class. I just wanted to give kind of representatives of what you needed to be aware of. Again, it's that addition to abilities for classes. It's a change to existing abilities, and all as well as all the additional subclasses, which I think for the most part are pretty good. The Psy Warrior, the Ruined Knight, Battle Master. Man, Battle Master fighters got a huge expansion in this. I mean, fighter is easily the most versatile class in the game. They're just amazing. I think fighter's a great class. Oath of Watchers is interesting. The Bard stuff is interesting. I think they're good. This is a high value book in my opinion. Again, you might have different points of view. I'd love to hear it if you do, but I think there's a lot of added. Now the Game Master stuff, man, that stuff great. I've already introduced in my Rime and the Frostmaiden campaign a patron. It's the first thing I did. These patrons that you get, they basically provide you a quick outline of some perks for different types of patrons. Again, this was something presented in Eberron Rising of the Last War, adapted and generalized here away from the setting specific stuff that you get with Eberron into sort of you can be backed by an aristocrat. And it just tells you the types of, in an academy, you might have a boarding school, an arc. So you might be Harry Potter, you might be the Umbrella Academy. There might be all kinds of analogs that you look at in a museum. What are the perks, which is compensation, documentation, research, all of these things. It gives you a baseline for what you can use as a game master and a player. Remember, these are tools for players too, because they should be asking the DM, hey, does my academy have a library I can use? It's really just something I really enjoyed. See, hey, Dairy Dice Roller, it's great to have you here. They say Tashas is one of their favorites. Our group is very excited about a lot of the content. I hope so. If any of you have presented it to your groups, actually, I would love to hear, how did your group become aware of it? My group, I don't think most of them have read it by now. So most of them, I'm introducing these elements to them. Most of them own it. They've gone to their class in our campaign, of course, and looked up all the new stuff they can do. They're super, super, super excited about that. Maybe something else I should point out is it's really interesting. I'm in the middle of a campaign. A new book has come out. I want to integrate new items into this. How do you do it? Do you, and they do actually include some information on that in Tasha's, but there's two basic ways to go, which is something happens in the world narratively that you can justify a change, a shift. They've learned something new. I think that's interesting. I didn't use that, but had I used it, I probably would have had some downtime when they encountered a new set of masters, or maybe their patron, getting involved in their patron opened up these new abilities for them. So maybe, that's something you can consider. Now, this idea is just occurring to me now that could have a lot of utility in a game. Imagine if you were to include Tashas in your game and patrons, you were saying, and it's to incentivize players to play with patrons. If you wanted that in your game, you basically said that to gain access to these additional abilities or these swapped abilities, you had to have a patron or you had to have a trainer of some kind. I think that would make it an immensely rich game. I actually think that's such a great idea. I think I'm going to write something on it this week. I love that idea. I think in future campaigns, I'll probably say Player's Handbook is where it's at. If you want to open up these other things in game, you probably have to discover it in world, convince somebody to train you or do something like that. That would be really interesting take. Anyway, that was a random thought that just occurred to me. But magical tattoos, which are magical items that can be integrated into your body. Things like prosthetic limbs are there, which I love, 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 because it opens up the accessibility has been a great topic brought in to games. I mean, player accessible. Obviously, we want the player themselves to have as much accessible options within a game as possible. But we're talking about characters, reflecting the spectrum of people that you would see in real life in the game world and letting them operate in the world. I think that's super, super interesting. Yeah, Dairy Dice Roller, yeah, encourages backstory as well, though. Yeah, it does encourage backstory. The thing I just said about playing towards starting out with player handbook options and then opening up options from books like Tasha's by letting them explore in the world, do backstories and training. That actually does. Backstory is not enough. It lets them set future goals, which is really where a game is at. I think there's too much focus on backstory. Campaigns, playing games is really more about what your future goals are. Backstory is about setting you up for why you want those goals, for how you might react when those goals start coming down. But the most valuable, the real gold of a backstory is what your goals are, where you're going with that character. What do you want to happen? Tell me as a GM, if this happened in world, this would be really interesting. And I would bite as hard as I can on that hook. If you tell me what you're going to do, what you would love to do, I will do it. I will probably move heaven and earth as a game master, literally, to make that happen within a game. So anyway, that's hugely valuable. The most valuable resource for me as a DM is what you want to do as a player character. So anyway, tattoos are open there. It gets into session 0, which is I think is really good. It stays away from more nitty gritty stuff. So I think you still want to look online for session 0 stuff. Sidekicks was introduced in the Essentials kit. I think they've really fleshed that out. Sidekicks is amazing. I actually, again, new idea just from reading this book, which is why I love new content and discussions. I actually think my next campaign, I would love to do a homebrew campaign. And I think when the COVID has passed and we're all able to see each other face to face again, my thoughts is start every player character as an expert, not an expert, as a sidekick class, and let them, when they level up to a first level player character class based on what they discover in the world. I think that actually might be super, super interesting. Anyway, I don't know if I'll do it, but the thought has occurred to me. But there's parlaying with monsters, supernatural regions to give you more environmental challenges. All of that is just, I love it. It's a rich bevy of tools and background options and rules options and inspirational thinking that can really feed a DM something meaningful about a game and do the most important thing possible to customize it, to make it your own. You make a player character your own by adding your personality, your point of view. DMs do that for the world. And that's the thing that sets D&D apart from any hobby in the world, is that computer games, movies, books, well, books less so. They're a generic point of view. It's a canned point of view. It's given to you. It's saying this is the world. This is what it is. D&D is presented to you. I would argue, and other people have argued, D&D is not a game. D&D is a rule set. The game is what happens at the table, and you making it your own, injecting your own creativity, your own point of view. That's what creates a game. And all of these books, Wizards of the Coast and the crew there they're killing it. They're doing a great job. They understand that deeply. And I see them, I read all of this as them understanding that and providing us with tools to do that as the gaming community. And I just love it. A couple more. The GM is Dairy Dice Roller again. GM is making us roll for magical tattoos after the Snickers commercial. I don't know what that means. No regrets. Yeah, no regrets. Yeah, there's a great meme out there where the person got a tattoo. It was supposed to say no regrets, and it says no regrets instead. Yeah, that's a great meme. Yeah, that would be interesting. It would. I mean, just again, hooks, right? Imagine your characters wake up first session. You wake up like it's the movie The Hangover. You wake up, you can't remember what's happened in the last 2 days, week, whatever. You all have tattoos, and they're magical tattoos, and you don't know what they do. Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be an awesome one shot or even element to a campaign? Wouldn't that be a lot of fun? And then they also, Dairy Dice Roll also said we're pretty loosey-goosey with our games and when we play no regular time. So sometimes backstory is just a box to check off on D&D Beyond. Yeah, that's true. You know, I had one of those great DM discussions with a player this week. They're a great player. I enjoy them in my campaign. But, you know, I, like everybody else, I have to manage my group. They have scheduling problems, and they have attention is all over the place, and they have different assumptions about the games, and that's the hardest thing about DMing. So I had a player, I wanted to talk to them a little bit. There were some signals to me that I was wondering. I can't tell them about what they think. And I'll get to that in a second, but they would give me some signals that like maybe they weren't as interested, or and I needed to just talk to them about. When I see you do this, this is how I read it. So what's going on with you? And it turns out that wasn't the case. They're engaged. They have some other things going on in life. They really enjoy the game. And we were all cool. It was fine. It was a great discussion. So random advice, which is mostly what this stream ends up being. It's something to keep in mind when you're running D&D games as a game master. My number one piece of advice when you're engaging players in difficult discussions about whether that they fit with the group, or there can be all kinds of really uncomfortable, difficult discussions as the DM with players sometimes. And people have advice about how to approach it, and those are good. But my advice, zero, before you get to other pieces of advice, my primary advice, zero, is don't tell somebody what they think or how they feel. Don't do it in life. Don't do it at the gaming table. Don't do it as a DM. Don't do it as a player. Don't tell them how they think or how they feel, because you don't know. You're assuming it. It's what your read on them is. Do not do that. It's a path to pain, because once you start a conversation with that, they might feel defensive. You're probably wrong that the thought, even if you're in the ballpark, the thought that you can sort of keenly understand somebody fully by a few actions, that's a fantasy. That's not true. People are complex. So don't approach them with how they think or feel. Instead, say, listen, I saw you do X, Y, or Z, and that makes me wonder if this is going on. And that's my advice, zero. Don't tell them. Ask them. If you want to know something about somebody, anybody, all of these movements in the world about inclusion, the core of it is, don't tell somebody who they are. Ask them if you have a question. So anyway, we went back to something. I had a great discussion with a player who I thought might have been checked out. They really weren't doing a lot of backstory, and I don't have a problem with that. That's perfectly valid. There are some times in a game where someone says, you know what? My parents are still alive, and I had a happy childhood. I just felt like being an entrepreneur, so I went to be an adventurer. That's a totally fine backstory. Now, if your campaign requires it, you get into some problems there. But one or two players having that, and other players having a deeper backstory, there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm okay with it. I just needed to hear from that player that that's okay with them, because what I was worried is I do try to throw in some tidbits and hooks, even if I try to make guesses of what it might have been, throw in some stuff. And that's what I was doing with this player. And I was worried that, I was making assumptions about their background that they didn't like. And it made me worried. And so I just had a moment where I talked with them about it. And again, following my own advice, I didn't say you're checked out of the game. I didn't say any of that, because that wasn't true. That would just be me being defensive. I said, hey, listen, I see you doing this, and you're not really getting into your backstory that much. So I'm wondering, are you digging this character? Are you not feeling it? And it ended up being a great conversation, and they are feeling it, and everything is cool. All right, so I know I burned up 40 minutes on all this general discussion. By the way, I did launch a company. I'm going to say that. This is my big announcement. I've incorporated optional rule games. You'll be seeing content online soon. I did not mean to click on this. I did have it up. I was going to say it at the end of the stream. I'll talk about it later. Follow me on the social medias. I'll be producing things, just adventures, some things like that. I'll be happy to do that. All right. So I do want to get to my Rime of the Frostmaiden session prep. We started out with Tashas. How do you put that into a game? I think I didn't say, by the way, I came up with this idea of how you can put it in the game, and I covered this backstory, training, all this other stuff. The other way, which is ironic, having discussed all this, the other way to do it, which I've chosen to do, is I don't want to overcomplicating it. It's called retconning, retroactive continuity, which you just say, this is the way it's always been, and you just didn't remember it right if we didn't have it before. That's the way we're going. So when they just wake up the next morning, and this is how life has always been. So they have these new powers. They've gone forward with it. Thank you very much for the congratulations, Dairy Dice Roller. So this has always been a part of their life. The reason why I chose to do that is because my game was literally on the night Tashas came out, so I hadn't had a chance to read it, and I hadn't had, these 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 I wish I'd thought about that, but I didn't, and I didn't have time to think about it. So I just said, let's just wave our magic wand and make sure that that happens. All right, so we are playing Rime of the Frostmaiden. We are now in our 8th session, about 2 months of playing. We started in mid September. Been a great game. We've done most weeks now, and it's great. I have 4 player characters. They're at the point where they're 3rd level. If you followed last week's stream, which will feed into this week's stream, because pacing is an important thing. You want to vary the encounters. There's 2 main points I've brought up in previous stream. One is pacing, and the other is balance. I'm going to talk about those because I kind of need some advice, actually. And I have a plot thread that if you have an idea for as I talk through this, I would love to hear your advice, because the truth is right now I got nothing, and I'm hoping to fill that gap. But I've teased it. I've J.J. Abrams it, right? I put some interesting tease out there that makes them think, ooh, there's something interesting that's going to happen, and I have no idea what that is. So I don't want to tell the players that, but that's where we are. I'll get to that in a second. So where they are is they're going on an adventure called the Caldron Caves, which is a hag that's from the module. I'm using it mostly as it is from the module. That's a hag that is in a cave near one of the towns. That I think the original setup was some adventurers had gone out into the lake and disappeared, and the town master hired the players to go look at them, and they run across this cave. I've changed it up just slightly, where I gave them a patron as of last session, which is just it's the head of the Harpers, actually, since one of the players rolled Harpers for their backstory. It's the head of the Harpers, who's an artificer alchemist held up in this sort of compound, a very old one. I set the stage to give a little bit more context for going to this cave, that the hag who's living in this cave is actually an old rival of this very old artificer, and that person was actually, when they were young, used to adventure with one of the player characters' grandparents. So there we are, incorporating backstory, and it actually happens to be the player character who I had the discussion with about backstory, which is why I was worried. I was making these plot elements and making these assertions about their character, and I was like, is this off? And it turns out it's on. So anyway, back during the day, this was their main rival. Their last adventure together, one of their party had died, and they all retired, basically. And this player character grew up hearing stories about this, and now they're there. And so she's this character runs a big compound where they were growing some food rapidly to help feed the people of the 10 towns in this dark that's happening in the campaign, and it was through a magic item that they were able to do it. So they're a lot sort of like the house that raises animals in Eberron. They're able to rapidly grow trout and in this trout farm and feed it into the lake, and it helps supplement some of the food supply here. But the magic item, which was just a MacGuffin I needed, so I created something called the Prism of Saloon that was stolen from their underground fish farm. And the hag had stolen it. She's brought it back to her cave. The NPC hired an adventure party prior to this, and they just disappeared and never came back. So that's how I'm connecting it to the adventure. So the player characters have gone down towards this cave. They're camping now. They've gone through the Easthaven. They've got some backstory from this, and they're going to the cave. They're camping like a mile from it, and it was great. We ended it. This is one of the things I love about D&D. I love, as a DM, where the dice take us. So I love the random nature of all this. So what happened at the end of last campaign, they were camping with their weather gear about a mile from the cave, getting ready for the next adventure. Now, in this last adventure, if you remember last campaign stream, preparation stream, I had set up an encounter for them that went exactly as I planned it to, which is I wanted them, they're 3rd level now. I wanted to set up an encounter for them with foes that had been challenging for them previously, that they could clearly see that they could just manhandle now. So that's exactly what I did. I set up some, if you remember my random encounter stream, I said I set up one of the selected random encounters where they ran across a caravan that had the guards had turned on the people running the caravan and just stolen their goods because I wanted it to be a moral test of the players. So they run across these bandits, burying the bodies of these caravanners. They were the guards hired to guard the caravan, but they decided to waylay it instead, and the players just tore through them. So they burned through them. It was two rounds, not much problem for the player characters at all. And they specifically said, and this was a great moment as a GM because I set this up to let them feel like they had become more powerful. Literally, one of the players said, man, this really you can really tell we've leveled up now because we burned through these guys. And it's all I could do not to just hug myself and feel too smug. It was my smug GM moment. But I am the world's okayest dungeon master, so that's what we do. So anyway, now we want to get into this adventure pacing wise. What I want is this upcoming adventure is going to be action heavy. I want them to feel the danger that they in now. So having established they've grown more powerful, base level enemies are easy for them to deal with. What I want pacing wise, and I always write down what I want out of this. Lots of action, having set the feeling of advancement, set the stage for how much more dangerous the world they are facing is now. So in other words, now that they've gotten to third level, it's not just bandits and goblins anymore. They're facing off against upcoming a hag, things with really dangerous powers, and they understand they're more powerful, but the stakes are a lot higher now. And that's what I want out of the Cauldron Caves. I think we're successfully going to do that. Got about 15 minutes, so a couple items I want to get to. I also want to teach the Arcane Brotherhood. If you have a device on this, please leave it in the comments. I have about 5 days before the campaign, but I don't have an idea right now, and I don't think I'm going to think of one in case one just suddenly occurs to me. I set it up so that the Arcane Brotherhood, in the module, you're supposed to go to Easthaven. You find an Arcane Brotherhood member being executed for murder. I changed it a little bit, but not that much, where they're the ones who betrayed the adventuring party going to this cave. And I don't have a reason for why. I just wanted to tease something with the Arcane Brotherhood because one of the players is interested in them and hasn't heard anything about them for a while. So I have to come up with some reason. So I want, at least in my mind, some collusion between the Arcane Brotherhood and power brokers like the Hag in the region, but I have no idea what. I'm cutting the whole plot line about the Netherreal City, so I don't know. Anyway, if you have a suggestion for what that is, put it in there. But I got nothing right now. What I've got instead is this cave, and that's where I really need to think through this. So if you watched my counterbalancing live stream from a week ago or a couple weeks ago, there's a big problem for DMs in this cave. And that is that there is a frost giant skeleton. Let me put it up. I need to be able to type faster if I'm going to do this live. There's a frost giant skeleton that is crazy, crazy powerful for the level. This is a third level party entering against a CR6 monster. The real difficulty here is the damage it can do during a critical. So it does 3d12 plus 6. On a critical, it does 6d12 plus 6. That is enough damage for a third level party to kill most of these characters outright if they roll critical and roll really well. Now, I don't like that. So because I don't want to just kill without recourse the party. So I need to rebalance this, but I have to think seriously about how do I want to change it. In that counterbalancing live stream, I talked a little bit about making some situational encounters and doing a bunch of stuff like that, which I might still do. But what I'm going to use here is a technique called action-oriented monsters. Matt Colville, who you probably know, he's one of the most famous D&D YouTubers out there. He had a great video in his Running the Game series last year sometime called Action-Oriented Monsters, which means you can do additional options besides like lair options and things like or legendary actions. You can do a few other a little slightly weaker things that they don't have to be these epic monsters that dress up the boss without to provide them some extra flavor and some extra danger without like blowing out the CR of the encounter itself. So that's what I'm thinking about doing here. and he suggested a couple techniques like giving them automatic abilities on certain stages of the initiative, giving them extra reactions every X number of rounds, maybe having something tick up or happen. There's lots of things you can do that tie it to the action within the scenario, and that's what I'm going to do. So what I think I need to do here, and you see my little note, since my main problem, I'm not going to change the CR of the creature. I'm going to keep its hit points. I'm going to keep its attack and damage. If my main worry is the possibility of a crit instantly killing a player, just take out the crit. Don't have it crit. Have something else happens if it crits. That's what I want out of this. So that's the technique I'm going to use. And again, you're a game master. You're not locked in. The rules are not rails. You can change anything you want. So I need something else to crit that happens on a crit if a player gets critted rather than damage. I'm going to roll normal damage, but I'm going to do something else with it. So the other thing you see here is I'm going to give them an automatic action on every round that goes in. So one of the backstory elements is I'm giving this frost giant the player backstory of their grandmother and all this stuff who had faced off against the hag before. In that backstory, they actually faced off against a hag and a live frost giant, of which now this is the undead skeleton of, and that the grandmother lost this legendary family shield, and the short of it is the shield can cast Thunder Wave, and because the player is always asking to knock other I tend to make tailored magic items for players based on what they express to me as an interest. So this player is always asking me, can I knock somebody down? So I thought I'm just going to make a magic item for them that lets them knock people back or down. I think they'll like it. So I've created a shield they can recover that casts Thunder Wave sometimes a day. I'm not going to worry about the limits the player will have. So what I'm going to have instead is this giant has that player's grandmother's shield that has been lost to the family, still is strapped to them. And on the initiative 10, in every round, they slam the shield into the ice. It releases Thunder Wave, does some damage, knocks players around with it, and it goes on from there. So I'm going to have that. I'm considering making that their action instead of the 10th initiative each round. Matter of fact, now that I'm thinking through it, my balance, again, so going back to my balance, my concern is the damage output from this monster is very high even without criticals. 25, 1 or 2 shots can take most third level characters down. So I don't want them to do damage. So instead, I don't want Thunder Wave does an additional 2d8 damage on top of it. I don't want to add damage and give them a regular attack if I'm giving this automatically. So automatically every round on initiative 10, in addition to their attack, they can go ahead and use this ability, and it's knockback only. So it honestly doesn't do a whole lot. It forces players to to fall back. I might give them a DC 10 save, DC 10. Let's say acrobatics, because they're on ice, to keep from falling down, keep from going prone. I mean, it's a little annoying, but it's just more for effect. I think it'll tease the capabilities of this shield to the player who would eventually get it. So that's my real interest in here. I'm not trying to kill the players. I'm just trying to create a more dynamic combat. So that's when they'll act normally. The NPC will act normally. I think they even have multi-attack, right? Yeah, they're multi-attack, 2 great axe swings. Woo! That's a lot. But so I'm take crits out as a possibility. I don't need them attacking with 2 opportunities to crit a player every turn. We're not doing that. So instead, I want action-oriented monsters. So when they crit, I'm going to replace crit with something else. That's what I'm going to do. Again, you're the game master. Do whatever you want. Stat blocks for monsters. The advantage here is they're not player characters. There's supposed to be a more limited set of abilities that guide you through combat. You don't have to do the full richness of player characters. So instead of crits, what do I want? It's good. I'm going to say knocks the player prone, maybe? That's what I'm thinking right now. If you have to suggestion, go ahead and ask or put it in chat. I would love to hear it. Hello there, an actual Cat 25. It's great to have you here. Thank you for your comments. They said, hey, a new DM here. Question: how do you go about creating brand new abilities found in other mediums? Yeah, example, Remorseless Winter, and ability that Death Knights have in a World of Warcraft. That's a good question. So again, so the core level is, I think you want to understand what the core abilities you're bringing on in are. Is it some sort of status effect? Is it some sort of damage? And then you want to look at similar abilities at that level tier. If it's a spell, look at other spells and see what their trade-offs are. Often there's some spell, and so the guide for spells and abilities are similarly. They either provide damage and no special status effect, in which case it's usually the maximum damage that tier is supposed to do, whether that be Fireball at 8D, whatever, it's 8D6, I think it is, at a third level spell. Use that as your maximum. And then if you start to look at other spells, what you'll see is a pattern of, well, it's trading damage for the additional status effects. So maybe it goes down to Fireball. I'm not trying to say Fireball, but you look at like some second level spells or first level spells, it's like 4d6, I think, is the maximum you can see of damage in there. And then other spells might go down to like 2d8 instead, but they make someone lose their reaction, or they have this ability trade-off against damage. And look as a guide to try to, based on other things, to see what that trade-off is. So that's what I would say. The other thing, ability like Death Knights, I think you can bring those in. You want to be careful about bringing in video game elements, because keep in mind, D&D is not a video game, but I always go back to, what do you want out of it? As a Death Knight, do I want to instill fear? Is that the narrative element I'm trying to say? And you can make this NPCs afraid. If that's the case, look at some other abilities like cause fear, or give them some area effect damage. But look at a spell or ability that does something similar. You're going to be hard pressed to find something that doesn't do something similar. So that's my and then also again, think about, are you treading on the unique aspects of some other class, and go cautiously if that's the case. So anyway, that's my advice, and that's how I do it. Anyway, we're getting on short on time, so I do want to say, so what I think is this crit ability, I'm going to take out the fact that they might crit and make this a knock them prone instead. Knock prone. Now my question is, do I want to make this automatic, or do I want to make this do I want to make it a save? I think I'm going to do a save. DC, what's their strength? Probably 16, right? Yeah. So what does, so again, the technique I just said, so if I look at Wolf, right, the monster of Wolf has an ability to knock someone prone when they hit them with an attack. And that's, I think, pack, tack, keen hearing, bite. All right, if the creature fails, it must succeed on a DC 11 strength saving throw, or not be knocked prone. And you can see the way they're coming up with that is they're starting out with a 10, which is what everything starts out in D&D, adding their strength just like a spell save DC, and saying that's what it is. So what I'm going to do is the same exact thing. This Frost Giant has a +6 strength modifier, so I'm going to say it's a DC 16 strength save, or be knocked prone. That creates a lot of the dynamic content in combat. I love it. So you look at this Frost Giant, it's going to scare the players a little bit more than it's going to threaten them pretty hard, but it's going to scare the players a lot. It's going to come out, it's going to get its normal attacks. It's going to be able to multi-attack. It moves at 40 feet around, so it's moving through here very quickly. I've already set from last stream, you might remember, I'm going to set some environmental challenges like the players might think, to be able to crash ice down on it from above. I'll set those up separately. But the shield, so it gets its normal attacks. It gets a shield action on initiative 10, slams the shield down in the ice. Anybody close to it get knocked back DC 10 acrobatics, or fall down on the ice and knocked back 15 feet. That's interesting. And then on a crit, it knocks someone prone. That's still dangerous, because now if the first attack crits somebody, knocks them prone, the second attack, which I would be loath to attack a PC twice, it's an advantage because they're laying on the ground. So I think that's a great encounter. It makes it very dynamic. There's things happening. People are going prone. They're getting knocked back. They can bring things down from the ceiling to do extra damage. That's a lot better than just stack of hit points against damage output. I like it, and I think it's a good way to rebalance that encounter. Okay, Dairy Dice Roller has another question. At low levels, for a high power ability, I might give them a little piece of it, and then add something further down the line that they can combo when it's appropriate. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Like the idea, we tease at this sometimes in D&D, but I haven't seen great rules for it. Maybe in other alternative versions of D&D, like the Middle Earth Adventurer's Guide, I've seen some of this, where the idea of giving players items that scale with them, that could be really cool. I haven't done that, like epic items. That's a in role playing games, they introduce the idea of epic items, so sort of like Glamdring, Gandalf from Gandalf's sword, or Sting. You don't see in these stories. You don't typically see people trading out items. Oh, I found a +2 sword, so I'm going to replace my +1 sword that I found 2 chapters ago. That's not what you see in narrative. So by having items scale with players, you end up being able to sort of keep this narrative through line through the entire campaign and let them think of their possessions as valuable. That's some other problems, because then they become too attached to it, and it limits the DM from running scenarios like where they make it captured and all their stuff taken. But yeah, no, I love that idea. I think that's I would love, so Dairy Dice Roll, if you have a design for that, please post it to Twitter. I'm in the middle of Naga Demon, I think they call it, National Game Design Month. I'm posting a creation of mine every day, a new spell, a new monster, a new house rule. I've been doing that. I'm at the 21st one. I have to post my one from today. I challenge you, Dairy Dice Roller, to make a rule for that and see how it would progress, or give me an example of that. It would be really wonderful to see. All right, we're right at about our hour. I want to promote again, I am doing a live stream for charity tonight. The Adventurers Guild is running a 24-hour live stream to benefit the Children's Hospital and Medicine, I think it's called, the Children's Hospital. Go ahead and make your donation there, please. It really would help a great cause. You can find that on Twitter you can find the link through my account at Optional Rule. You can find it through the Adventurers Guild on Twitter. It really is a lot to do there. I will be playing a character based on Frenchie from The Boys tonight from the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern Time stream tonight live on Twitch. So please join me there for my character, Frenchie. I think it's going to be a great time. So I hope you enjoyed the stream. Please give this video a like, a thumbs up, a follow, comment down it if you're seeing later down on the tavern wall. I really appreciate your time joining me here today. I hope you'll share this with friends as well on social media. And please share the live stream that's happening tonight. I really appreciate you joining me today. I'll be back next week with another live stream session prep. I look forward to talking to you then, as I am every week. So until next week, remember, fun is not optional. Enjoy your week. Thank you very much, everybody, and we will see you next week.